You're listening to A Sign of Hope, an original podcast from Caritas Denmark. A truck makes its way through the green landscape on a damp red dirt road. It's a particularly humid morning in March. Lucy Esipila sits in the back seat. She is the Regional Executive Secretary of Caritas Africa, and together with a small team from Caritas, she has arrived in Zimbabwe. The team is on the way to visit a school situated in rural Zimbabwe.
Last week I was in Zimbabwe. We were going to visit a school which has been affected by the drought.
The road is bumpy and riddled with potholes, carved out by heavy rains and standing water. Still, the truck carries the team safely to their destination. They are greeted by loud, joyful children, running toward the truck in light blue polos and tall white socks. At a glance, nothing about the pupils and their neat uniforms revealed that the school is struggling to make ends meet.
And what happens is, in this school they have 247 students. The school fees is $50. Out of the 247 students, only 50 have paid. This is a government school that is supposed to make enough resources to pay teachers, to provide for simple things like textbooks, and also to run the school.
Lucy's work involves coordinating projects and efforts across 46 African countries. She herself is from Kenya in the east, but now lives in Togo in the west. And right now she's in southern Africa, in Zimbabwe. When she travels, there's one question she loves to ask the children she meets along the way. A question whose answers make her feel hopeful about the future.
So it's good to just understand the worldview of children. And I think for us, we were keen to understand what are your dreams, because you're here in this community that is far from mainstream infrastructure. I mean, accessing that place is not easy.
When she asks children about their biggest dream, the answers are usually similar. I want to become a doctor, I want to be a professional footballer, and every now and then, I want to be a rapper. But today, it sounds different.
One thing that stood out for me when we were speaking with the children to ask them, how does this, how are you, what is your dream? And one of the things that you could hear is someone saying that, I'm working so hard so that I can have income to help my family and help them to also pay school fees for my sisters. They understand that their parents are struggling. And someone is thinking, maybe if I become a house help, this is quite a dream.
In the small Zimbabwean village, the poverty is so severe that many parents can't afford either food or school fees for their children. What motivates parents to send their kids to school, despite the cost, is the meal the kids receive at the school. Currently, it's only the economic support that Caritas provides that allows the school to keep going.
And you can see how poverty pushes people. And you see, if there is no food, there's no motivation to come to school. And what does this translate to? Absenteeism. What does this translate to? Literacy rates, which continue to decline.
Illiteracy leads to lack of education, which leads to difficult living conditions, poverty, and often misery. And you might be thinking, so what? Yes, there are poor people in Africa. Yes, humanitarian aid is important. It's a story we've heard many times before. But have you ever really thought about why it keeps being this way? Africa is receiving financial aid again and again, and yet so much remains the same. Why is that? That is the story you're about to hear. For a moment, we leave the school in Zimbabwe behind. As we zoom out, the African continent comes into view from high up above. It's the second largest continent on Earth, home to 54 countries, the world's longest river, vast deserts, dense rainforests, and a seemingly endless amount of natural resources.
You have very good minerals in Congo, which can help you to do batteries and the solar systems and develop what is needed for mobile phones. You have rubber in Liberia, which is really good for us to produce wheels for our roads. If you look at Mozambique, they have gas. If you look at Zimbabwe, they have all resources that you can think about, diamond, gold. These countries are not able to simply advance their economies based on the natural resources that they have.
Despite vast amounts of natural resources, many African countries are burdened by debt. Take Zimbabwe, for instance, with all its gold and diamonds.
Their gross domestic product, 92% goes towards servicing debt. So you can imagine like you have an income of 2,000 euros and at least maybe 1,900 goes towards servicing debt. So you're paying the debt and you're paying the interest. So you have to function within this little amount that is there that eats into the small reserves that you have.
This is the root of the problem. Many countries are so deeply indebted that they spend nearly all their money on repayments and interests, leaving little room for infrastructure and basic public services like schools and healthcare. But why?
We tend to look at it from this one particular lens. Oh, your people are corrupt. When we give them money, they do this, they do this, they do this. It is true. We must hold our governments accountable. We need to have a system where citizen priorities are taken into account, where we will question fiscal policies, where we will want to see how our taxes are being used. That is very important. But we also have to hold players in the international system to account.
It's complicated to explain exactly why so many African countries today find themselves in a major debt crisis. The causes are many and complex, and we won't be able to cover every nuance here in the podcast. But let me try to give you some of the pieces of the puzzle. One part of the explanation lies in the old, and still very important, history of colonization.
If you look at the way the international system has been from the old age, there was this period of colonial era, and where people came in, set up camp, there was colonization. And when colonization was happening, the other countries which were developing and industrializing and doing all these things and building roads. And there was the period of the slave trade era where people were moved from these countries and went to develop these other economies. So as other economies were developing, others were really relatively lagging behind.
In the 1960s, African countries begin to regain their independence after decades of colonial rule.
But you still do not have enough systems, processes, procedures in place to benefit from this. So external investors come in, set up camp, and benefit and extract these industries as much as possible.
African economies are often small, and it takes major investments to build things like cement factories or diamond mines. The starting point for many African economies is therefore very different from that of many European countries. And that's part of the explanation for why several African nations today face a serious debt crisis. But having debt isn't unusual in itself. Countries regularly issue government bonds and borrows money from other nations, from major international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and from private investors. In the EU, for example, debt is considered acceptable as long as it doesn't exceed 60% of GDP. A country like Germany is close to the limit, while Denmark is well below, with debt at around 35 to 40% of GDP.
Japan has borrowed 100% of its GDP. Maybe someone could argue like that. But the interest rates are not the same.
No, interest rates aren't the same for all countries.
Usually how it works is that if you're a high risk, the interest rate is very high. A country in the G7 will not get the same interest rate as maybe a country like Zambia. So there's that risk that happens, and it leads to the debt crisis.
A country's revenues, for example from taxes, are swallowed up by high interest payments. As a result, some countries feel forced to borrow even more money.
And then another thing that happens within this context where there's balance of payment deficit, you are doing excessive borrowing. So today, teachers are striking because they have not been paid. We go and borrow from Japan. Today, the healthcare workers are striking. We go and borrow from India. We go and borrow from China to do our roads. We go and borrow from the IMF and World Bank. So there's this excessive borrowing.
And not all lenders are equally ethical.
You're trapping people. You borrow, and the next thing, you borrow again, and then you borrow. It's a trap. Can we stop this debt trap and push for responsible lending? So if you're giving money, you are a responsible lender. And the one who is borrowing is a responsible borrower. I mean, let us borrow within our limits.
Another piece of the debt crisis puzzle is political instability.
I don't know if you've been watching the news. Like right now, there's instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The other time we were seeing issues in Mozambique, which these countries are in political instability, and it means that investors are not keen to work over there. And when investors lose their confidence, they walk away. So these are some of the things that fuel the crisis.
As I've already touched upon, the causes of the debt crisis we see today are many and complex. Responsibility can be found both among those who lend money without conscience, among African governments, and within the very structures themselves. One thing, however, is certain. It's ordinary people who end up paying the price. Families and children, like those in the Zimbabwean village Lucy visited on that humid March morning.
If you were to speak to somebody right now from any one African country, they'll tell you, I have a brother who does not have a job. I have a sister who does not have a job. And now that I'm here, I need to send some money back home. So whatever you're making, you have to balance it for yourself. You have to balance it for your people back home. If today you were to tell someone from any one African country that you have cancer, that is a death sentence for the family. It means they will sell every single thing to be able to afford chemotherapy, the medication required. It will eat into the family and drive people into poverty because the health systems are fragile. So this is what debt crisis looks like and narrows down to the individuals.
The weight of the crisis is being carried by ordinary people, and young Africans are speaking up to demand change.
Young people were analyzing the finance bill and questioning. And in fact, right now in the advent of social media, they even go to the IMF and World Bank and tell them, stop giving my country loans. You are pushing us into poverty.
So, what do we do about this issue? How do we fix it? Surely there's no easy answer, is there? Well, actually, yes, there is. A solution that could improve the situation instantly. I'm talking about debt cancellation.
And what was the idea was behind it is to free developing nations from crushing debt burdens, which hinder economic growth. That was the idea.
This isn't just a flashy quick fix. Led by the recently deceased Pope Francis, more than 100 faith leaders from around the world have signed an appeal addressed to the world's finance ministers to put an end to the debt crisis. This was orchestrated in relation to the Pope declaring 2025 as a Jubilee year.
Pope Francis launched the Jubilee in 2025, and the idea is to talk about pilgrims of hope. And so what we are doing is to call for this multilateral reform. All these things that I have talked about earlier, the multilateral reform, let us look at it. Can China join the Western nations in the negotiating table? And let us see how can we all work together. And let us see how to cancel this unjust debt. And let us give people their dignity.
And history shows that this approach actually works. 25 years ago, there was another push to cancel unpayable debts.
Back then, there was this push that we need to cancel unjust debt. And so it was within the late 1990s to early 2000. For example, Ghana in 2004, it received debt relief. As a result, when you're not paying debt, for example, if today you are paying me 50 euros per month, then I tell you, stop. So maybe you will save at the end of the year 600. So what Ghana did, because now I'm not paying loans, this money it used for social programs. This was in 2004, education and infrastructure. Ethiopia also received this high debt indebted poor country initiatives in 2004 and redirected funds to health, education. Tanzania was also one of the things that received debt relief in 2001, and it went towards free primary education. Burkina Faso, which received debt relief in 2000, and also some additional reductions. And so when you really receive debt relief, so some financing could go towards education, because these are the things that we keep looking at: education, healthcare, social sector, social protection systems for older people, for people living with disability. With Mozambique in 2001, they focused on rebuilding after civil war. So it basically depends on the government itself and the priorities.
A country like Zambia currently spends half of its national income on debt repayments. If that debt were to be cancelled, millions could instead be invested in welfare and the growth of local industries.
Can we look at ways to boost to industrialize, to set up systems, processes, and whatnot, so that we have economic growth where we are able to generate revenue in a way that we have income and we do not have to borrow, instead of these austerity measures. I think in the 70s, there was this meeting, I think it was on the new international economic order, just to look at the natural resources in Africa and how they are managed and how they can work better for the people. Can we revisit some of these conversations? There's a lot of awareness that needs to be done. And on the other hand, in the Western nations, they need to understand this dimension of extractivism, how it comes, how it occurs, and how much we need to raise so much awareness on how much money is leaving these countries in terms of the interest they are paying, in terms of how they sell raw materials at very low costs and then buy it at very cheap costs.
If we can turn debt into hope and dreams, then maybe those school children at the end of the bumpy dirt road in Zimbabwe can leave their worries behind and instead focus on their dreams for the future.
Debt can be turned into hope, and it can be turned into hope when we cancel it. It's not a generosity issue, it is a justice issue. This is unjust debt.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. A Sign of Hope is produced by the podcast agency hearHEAR and published by Caritas Denmark, supported by Danida, Denmark's development cooperation. The narrator, that's me, was created with help from AI. Once again, thank you for your time. Remember to see, to listen to, and to feel the world around you, the one close to you. But also remember, there is a bigger world out there,